This is our third annual oration, and we're delighted to have Antoinette Lattouf, whom I'll introduce in a moment, with us. Slight innovation this year, little innovation this year, but we're very pleased to have someone offering a response, and that will be Gabriel Shipton, whom I introduce later. Now, let me tell you a word or two, if I may, about Antoinette, though she probably doesn't need introduction, or much introduction to the people assembled in this place. Antoinette Lattouf is a journalist, author, broadcaster, columnist, TED speaker, charity co-founder, mental health ambassador, and human rights advocate. And as we all know, recently she successfully sued the ABC. She's a frequent contributor to TV current affairs programs, newspaper columns. She hosts the Weekend Briefing podcast and co-founded Media Diversity Australia some years ago. In 2022, she delivered the TED Talk, Reverse Discrimination Doesn't Exist, but Tokenism Does. Last year, she received the Liberty Victoria Human Rights Medal and the New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties Press Award for journalism. Her first book, How to Lose Friends and Influence White People, cemented her as a sharp contributor to public discourse. The second book, Women Who Win, will be published by Penguin in the new year. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to invite Antoinette Lattouf to address us in this year's annual oration.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. And to be honest, in these times, I find this to be a strange perch to stand on, to be praised or introduced warmly and handed a microphone at a time drenched in loss in the erosion of human rights and civil liberties. The contrast breaks. My own bruises sit aside the far greater suffering carried by some of the most marginalised people in this country and on the planet. Their grief is not a footnote to my story. It is the backdrop, the soundscape, the thing I measure myself against. Holding a platform inside an ecosystem that punishes people who defend human rights or punishes people who defend a free press is its own quiet torment. You keep asking, why me? Why now? And why does speaking truth still come with a price that most people would never agree to pay? But I paid for it anyway. Unlawfully fired, my character pulled apart, threatened, intimidated, resolve thinned, savings emptied, work evaporated. A tidy demonstration of how quickly a system can fold you up and file you under inconvenient, all while keeping a straight face. And yet walking through a machine built to silence me, built to draft my story for me, that does something peculiar to a person. Refusing the role assigned, refusing to dim my voice, refusing to leave power unnamed or unchallenged, creates its own shape. I didn't just come out triumphant. I came out determined, still standing, still asking questions that make some rooms uncomfortable. And despite that, I cannot and will not ignore the heavier ache of watching the levers of power reward billionaires, punish vulnerable communities, and let governments chip away at civil liberties under the dusty banner of social cohesion and security. A banner that frays at the moment you look at it closely. So here I am, battered, not broken, worried, not frozen. I don't crave praise, and I don't crave being called brave. I want movement and solidarity. I want values that translate into action, and I want people to stop waiting for someone else to go first, then clapping once it feels safe. Change never arrives because applause reaches a polite volume. So here is where we travel next, and thank you for coming along with me this evening. Firstly, I will address the assault on public broadcasters here and in the UK. That includes my own case against the ABC and the slow unravelling now plaguing the BBC. And what it means when institutions meant to serve the public are weakened, hollowed and bent out of shape. If they don't collapse overnight, they wither quietly when their watchdogs lose their teeth. Second, the pressure closing in on journalism. Well, another pressure closing in on journalism. AI's quiet creep into the information bloodstream. I'll look at the dominance of social media giants whose reach far exceeds responsibility. And the way truth is drowned out, not by one line, but by a flood of noise. This too has implications for human rights. And thirdly, I will outline the possible way forward, the glimmers, some surprising wins, the rise of independent media that refuses to be cowed. So as we all know, democracy only stands when people have the information to hold power to account. And a free press is not a luxury, it is the spine that keeps everything else upright. Which is why a strong, well-funded and genuinely independent public broadcaster is one of the best safeguards we have for human rights and civil liberties. At least that's what it should be. Instead, much to people's dismay and much to my heartbreak, the ABC has drifted into something far smaller and far more timid. As was illustrated in my case, its leadership not only perjured itself in the witness box, its journalism and independence bent under pressure from pro-Israel lobbyists, and as Justice Darrell Rangier found in Lattouf v ABC, the editorial spine collapsed the moment the Australian rattled its cage. There is a direct line between this kind of political fragility and the way stories about human rights are covered. Palestinians, among the most harmed, scrutinised and dehumanised people on earth, pay the price when a public broadcaster becomes allergic to truth that upsets the powerful. Trust erodes amongst those watching and even amongst those telling the stories. And this erosion only intensifies when the violence unfolding, it's not abstract, it's not theoretical, it is being live streamed via our social media. It has been every day for the past 2 years. And we saw how serious this has become when Human Rights Watch, one of the most respected Human Rights Watch organisations in the world, from their New York head office, issued a global press release after I was fired by the ABC, urging journalists not to be afraid of sharing its findings during this ongoing live stream genocide. The fact that the ABC fired me for sharing a Human Rights Watch post with factual information about starvation as being used as a weapon of war was a warning sign about where we now stand when human rights violations unfold in plain sight and what happens when a public broadcaster shrinks from its own mission. And this sits in a much bigger global pattern. The erosion of press freedom and human rights in tandem as the wealth gap widens and tech moguls get more power and authoritarianism pollutes democratic states. These actions threaten press freedom and human rights, creating an environment of fear, silence and criticism, which can allow political power to operate without scrutiny. But this climate did not form in isolation. It sits on top of years of orchestrated political attacks from Murdoch media. It sits on top of Scott Morrison's captain's pick of former ABC chair Ita Buttress. It sits on top of more than $500 million drained from the ABC between 2012 and 2022 under successive coalition governments. At least in that period, 700 jobs were lost. And when the ABC's own structural racism review landed in 2024 after Stan Grant's departure and found systemic racism was ingrained in the organisation, what followed was little more than polite acknowledgements
and we are yet to see evidence of structural repair. In fact, remember, it was the ABC's lawyers who submitted the argument just this year that the onus of proof in court was on me to prove that the Arab, Middle Eastern, or Lebanese race exists. It was an argument that they later withdrew, but the damage was done. All of this is happening in the wider context of a country that has been steadily criminalising journalism. In 2 decades, Australia has passed more than 75 national security and secrecy laws, more than almost any other democracy. And who can forget in mid-2019 when the AFP raided the ABC's Sydney headquarters over the Afghan files, which exposed alleged human rights violations by Australian special forces. The home of News Corp journalist Annika Smethurst was raided the day before. Whistleblowers also continue to face prosecution. And the message to reporters is unmistakable: proceed with caution. So when more than 300 journalists, Australian journalists, signed a petition calling for fairer and more ethical reporting of Gaza, this was in late 2023, almost exactly 2 years ago, the reaction from editorial leaders should not have been surprising, although it still shocked us. I was one of the signatories. Before I tell you what the fallout and the reaction was, let me talk through exactly what was asked for. The petition asked for what we saw as basic journalism. 1, adhere to truth over both sidesism. 2, centre the human tragedy in the coverage of the conflict. 3, apply as much professional skepticism when prioritising or relying on uncorroborated Israeli government and military sources to shape coverage as is applied to Hamas. 4, give adequate coverage to credible allegations of war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. And don't avoid using the word Palestine where appropriate. 5, provide historical context when referencing the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel. The conflict did not start on October 7. Provide full and fair coverage of Australia's growing anti-war movement, including the large weekly protests in capital cities. 7, be transparent about journalists who have been on all expenses paid trips to Israel organised by pro-Israeli government groups. And there is a list of those journalists, if you haven't seen it. Crikey has compiled a list. And it includes pretty much the senior editorial leaders at most media organisations in this country. Number 8, trust Australian journalists of Palestinian, Arab, Muslim and Jewish backgrounds to do their jobs. Diversity is an asset in newsrooms and should be harnessed to enrich coverage. We've got a translation service. As a result of this petition that 300 of us signed in November 2023, journalists who signed from 9 newspapers were banned from covering Gaza. The Guardian did not have as explicit a ban put out, but it played out practically the same way. ABC journalists were chastised and put on notice. Many learned to keep their concerns to themselves. And I know this not in theory, but because journalists still contact me almost daily with stories they are not allowed to tell. Many resigned. Some remain, but feel this tension every day, that whether they need to pay their bills and stay employed, but they know that they're doing this story and also the craft of journalism a disservice. In the face of the worst human rights atrocities of my lifetime, Australia's media ecosystem is being shaped by billionaire owners, political pressure, and a powerful lobby group aligned with a state whose leader is wanted for war crimes. That combination has chilled coverage of human rights and genocide in a way I have not seen any other story influenced in my entire 20-year career. The democracy only functions when its press is free enough and brave enough to speak plainly. Right now, both are under strain. And until that shifts, the public cannot be confident that the truth reaches them unfiltered, and crucially, that our government is being held to account. Outlets now, while some are shifting slightly, still largely avoid using the word genocide, still prioritize Israeli denials in headlines, and still use passive language rather than humanizing the unspeakable violence and horror inflicted on Palestinians. And even Lebanese people, as Lebanon continued to be bombarded by the idea almost daily since the ceasefire came in place. Unlike the atrocities and unfolding genocide in Gaza, which are deplorable and yes, deserve more coverage and care, what we don't see happen there is headlines which allow the perpetrators to deny or lie about their actions. We should never both sides of genocide. Now to the UK's public broadcaster. The BBC has spent the last few days being shaken like a snow globe by a lawsuit threat from President Donald Trump. You could almost hear the collective gasp from London to Washington. Allow me to give you the short version of this saga. A very long complaint letter was sent to the BBC, which was rebranded as a dossier to make it sound more important and official. Because nothing spices up a culture war like a bureaucratic word in a trench coat. The author was Michael Prescott, once a journalist, once an advisor to Conservative PM Theresa May, and for a decade, the political editor of the Sunday Times, a Murdoch-owned newsrooms. My little sensors and my alarm bells are already going off. He did some advisory work for the BBC. And this letter that he wrote surfaced in the Telegraph, a conservative paper which has always been ready to shout bias at the BBC, especially on the favourite battlegrounds of gender, race, Israel, Gaza, and of course Trump, which were all the subheadings of this convenient letter. The Telegraph dutifully ran the letter in full. Then Trump, who hates any press he cannot bend, grabbed hold of the moment and turned it into a stage. Naturally, the clip about Donald Trump, the edited clip, got the most attention. He is, after all, the president, and he has made a sport of punishing journalists in his own country. But the noise wasn't just American. It echoed through conservative British voices and the Murdoch press, who have never hidden their wish to see the BBC weakened or abolished altogether. A public broadcaster without teeth suits them fine. But a quick note about that panorama edit, because that's what most of the headlines have focused on. Yes, there was a jump cut. And a jump cut is where you splice two bits of the video and pop them together. Yes, there are more ethical and transparent ways to show an edit point. A quick flash frame is one way to do so. And yes, the sentence was altered because the second half came from more than 40 minutes later in that same speech. But the edit did not rewrite the broader narrative. It did not contort the context. It was probably an ethical production mistake, not, I would say, anything that shifted what led to January 6th. The outrage, however, was treated like a national emergency. Yes, public broadcasters must be transparent. Yes, they must be accountable. The BBC is not an untouchable cathedral, but this particular explosion felt engineered. A precision strike from the right, hitting every culture war button, like a gamer on speedrun mode. It activated Trump, conservative commentators, media outlets in unison, and anyone else eager to drag the BBC through the mud. And the outcome is predictable. There are resignations. Now, BBC journalists will think twice. They will probably self-censor. They probably not want to criticise Donald Trump too much. Probably don't want to show Israel as the aggressor. And whatever you do, don't avoid a positive trans story, because that was also one of the criticisms, that the stories about trans positive lives wasn't balanced. Balanced, they will be told, both sides, they will be reminded, a chilling effect dressed up as concern for fairness. Because let's not forget, Trump was charged and then acquitted for incitement of insurrection in 2021 because it couldn't pass the Senate. The US Senate fell 10 votes short of the 2/3 majority required to convict him. There was enough evidence to accurately and fairly depict Trump's role in undermining election results, banning division and galvanizing his supporters to march on the Capitol without having to re-edit this particular part of the speech in the way that it was edited. Did this questionable edit deserve this much frenzy? Especially when there is another BBC bias story quietly gathering dust, one that should have provoked at least some level of public scrutiny, yet somehow barely raised an eyebrow. This time, the BBC's Middle East online editor is suing an independent journalist. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got Donald Trump, you've got conservative media, a former Murdoch editor, advisor to Theresa May, accusing the BBC of bias. At the other end, you have a progressive independent journalist, Owen Jones, who published an investigation suggesting the ABC has a serious pro-Israel tilt. And for his trouble, he's facing litigation and being sued for defamation. In December 2024, Owen Jones published an investigation for Dropsite News titled BBC Civil War on Gaza. He spoke to 13 different current and former BBC journalists. Jones has a huge online audience, hundreds of thousands across platforms, 800,000 on TikTok, 400,000 on Instagram. And the people he interviewed claimed the corporation's Gaza coverage was credulous towards Israel, devalued Palestinian life, and brushed past atrocities. And several said the Middle East online editor, Rafi Berg, routinely rewrote headlines and texts to mirror the Israeli military's perspective. One former staffer told Jones that Berg watered down anything too critical of Israel. Berg denies all of these allegations. The piece at the time did trigger some small protests outside BBC buildings and a petition calling for Berg's suspension. Now, Berg denies the allegations. He's worked at the BBC since 2001, and he's since then overseen online Middle East output. And in the past week, we have learned he is now seeking damages for mental distress and reputation harm, along with the removal of the piece from the internet. Now, Owen Jones says he stands by the reporting, and Dropsite News has asked readers to help fund its defence. Now, when Owen Jones first reached out to Rafi Berg for comment over a year ago, Dropsite News reported Berg hired high-profile defamation lawyer Martin Lewis, who had once directed UK Lawyers for Israel, to provide his defence. Now, I remember this. I remember reading the story a year ago, almost a year ago, and seeing at the top they were, I guess, bracing for a legal response. But here's another interesting part of the story. In November 2024, exactly a year ago, more than 100 BBC staff accused their own organisation of giving Israel favourable coverage and failing to produce accurate evidence-based journalism, failing to humanise Palestinians and their suffering. 100 staff raising alarm. Yet, no resignation parade, no political thunderclap, no promises to do better. So the question hangs in the air like smoke. Does one external advisor's leaked letter of complaint matter more than 100 editorial staff? Or is something only controversial when it disturbs the powerful? This is the reckoning public broadcasters face, and it lands squarely on the fragile terrain where press freedom meets human rights. But of course, none of this is happening in a vacuum or in isolation. We are living through a technological revolution that is moving far faster than the legal and ethical guardrails meant to contain it. Artificial intelligence has crashed into the media landscape like a runaway trade EU, carrying both promise and peril it betray. Used well, AI can help us work smarter. It can translate, analyse, transcribe, in some cases fact-check, not always well at this stage, sift through mountains of documents and surface what it says matters. It can free up time for the kind of journalism, that actually strengthens democracy. Hyperlocal reporting, the court rounds, the FOI-driven investigations, the dull but vital scrutiny that keeps power from rotting. But in the wrong hands, AI becomes a weapon, a tool for censorship, a machine for surveillance, a megaphone for harassment and foreign interference, a factory for synthetic lies. Or as Donald Trump recently showed, another political tool covered extensively by the media after he posted a video on social media of an AI version of him flying a plane and dumping shit on protesters when Americans across 2,700 locations were rallying in the No Kings rallies, pushing against criminal fascism. We've already seen radio hosts exposed in Australia as being AI. There will likely be more deepfakes that mimic journalists, fake articles attributed to real journalists, synthetic audio designed to smear, intimidate, or discredit. And let's be frank, authoritarians love a tool that can silence critics without leaving fingerprints. That is how AI becomes not just a threat to press freedom, but a facilitator of transnational repression. Press freedom is not an abstract concept in a law textbook, a nice to have or a vague aspiration. It is the practical muscle behind the human right to seek, receive, and impart information. And when that muscle atrophies, other rights weaken with it. You cannot organise, you cannot expose abuse, you cannot challenge power, you cannot defend the public against state violence or corporate greed. And the platforms that now mediate most of our communication, the social media behemoths, the global tech monopolies have hollowed out local and regional newsrooms while refusing to take responsibility for the information environment they have built. They harvest the revenue, local outlets eat the dust. And local journalism should not be quaint or nostalgic. It is the first responder to power. When it collapses, corruption grows, minorities are misrepresented, and communities lose the ability to see themselves respected, reflected truthfully. AI could help reverse that decline, but only if the technology is used to support journalists, not replace them. We don't need AI to free up time so bosses can hire fewer people. We don't need AI to free up time so journalists can do more of the work that protects. We need AI to free up time so journalists can do more of the work that protects the public, the door knocks, the document hunts, the uncomfortable questions at the press conferences nobody else dares ask. But many smaller outlets don't have the money, staff, or training to use AI safely or effectively. And so they fall further behind, leaving communities starved of reliable information, while disinformation gallops freely through the algorithmic feeds. And this decline feeds directly into an erosion of pluralism, diversity, and democratic participation, which is why governments at every level, state and federal, need to stop pontificating about the importance of a free press while simultaneously straddling it through neglect. If AI is to have any place in journalism, it must serve one purpose: helping communities access quality independent news, not auto-generated sludge, not deepfake propaganda, and not another tool for surveillance. We can harness the best of this technology without surrendering the newsrooms to it, but only if we remember the central lesson running through everything that I've spoken about tonight. When you weaken press freedom, you weaken human rights. When you weaken human rights, you weaken democracy. And when you let powerful institutions wield unchecked technological tools, they will eventually turn those tools on the very people that are meant to serve. That is the crossroads we stand at now. And the decisions made in the next few years, probably sooner than that, will decide whether journalism becomes stronger or whether it becomes another casualty of the forces already eroding our freedoms. Media freedoms stand like a weather-beaten lighthouse. It does not promise safety, only some clarity. It exposes reefs that those in power would rather keep submerged. Strip it away and the whole democratic coastline starts to erode. When the press is strangled, human rights do not wither politely. They fall like a building whose foundations have been quietly sawed through. Yet, even in this bleak landscape, something stirs. Not hope, which has become a bit of a luxury item, but motion. I like to say that I'm post-hope. Pressure. Small uprisings of refusal. Independent outlets keep springing up like weeds in concrete cracks. In the last year, we've seen Lamestream launch, Cheap Media grow, Deep Cut News launched, Michael West Media covering more important stories, The Shop's Voice cutting through, declassified their work on Australia's F-35 exports, forced the rest of the media heard to stop gazing and actually look at the blood on the fence. Audiences tired of being patronised are voting with their clicks and their wallets. Skepticism is growing teeth. My friend and colleague Jan Fran and I launched Et Media. And even inside the big institutions, the mood is shifting. Slowly, warily, but shifting. ABC journalists keep telling me they feel something loosening. Not a revolution, but a recalibration. More staff feel empowered to call out dodgy practices, posting online what once stayed whispered, pushing back against lobbyists. Management missteps are no longer met with polite silence. There are, of course, still many sharp minds inside the ABC trying to win back the trust that others squandered, and they tell me they stand a little bit taller. Still, this is not the season for pastoral optimism. That ship sank somewhere between the newsroom and the courtroom. Action, refusal, the moral, stubborn work of holding the line when institutions falter is what's needed. It's not pretty, but it's necessary. If democracy is to breathe, its pillars need more than admiration. They need people willing to defend them where the lights dim. I want to share something with you that I was asked to write. I was at a writers' festival in on the Mornington Peninsula, and I was asked to give a living eulogy where I wanted to memorialize something that was still alive. It could be a person, it could be a friendship, it could be an inanimate object, whatever I mourned, whatever I thought needed to be revered and remembered. I wrote a living eulogy for the spine. I considered mourning the tragic decline of the ABC's independence and integrity. I still wait for vital signs, but the pulse is faint. I flirted with farewelling Ida Buttros's so-called girl boss media legacy after the launch of Unapologetically Ita, a fitting title. I can confirm she does not apologise. But I chose instead to honour something that kept me upright when the world hit me in the ribs and I refused to fold. This is an ode to the spine. Not only the 33 bones that stop us collapsing, but the moral architecture that lets us face the wind without wavering. Each vertebra a conviction, each disc a compromise resisted. Once courage spread like sparks in dry grass, now algorithms snuff it out. We scroll past genocide, assaults on press freedom, war crimes, worrying more about careers than conscience. The backbone used to be a birthright, now it is endangered. We once stood tall and exposed violence against women, corporate corruption, the need for marriage equality. Yet somehow this same spine has gone missing while Palestinians are being murdered in plain sight. Many have swapped vertebra for vertigel. The nation's core jiggles on impact, spluttering at the first hint of pressure. No chiropractor convicts this kind of slap. It's not the back that's out, it's a rot at the core. I look around and see spines doing contortionist manoeuvres to avoid any consequences, real or imagined. The bends and twists of moral gymnastics would make a circus act blush. Those with the best vantage point, the most power, are almost always the ones most defensively and strategically curled tighter. The very people paid to stand guard over truth and justice are curling into themselves, trying to keep their heads down while freedoms fall around them like confetti from a failed parade. Sure, courage is contagious, but so is cowardice. And you can feel cowardice spreading, the timidity, the polite compliance, the viral fear of backlash. I see it in headlines that tiptoe around truth, the politicians who wait to speak until it no longer matters, in citizens who've learned that silence pays better, at least in the short term, than resisting evil and demanding accountability ever will. The physical spine, we're told, can be strengthened by presence, the moral by pressure, the moral one should be too. Yet ours has gone soft, lynching at every nudge. We see fascism creeping in, while many call it too complex and want to balance out the other side. We watch a live-streamed genocide framed as conflict, and journalists, authors, artists punished not for lying, but for seeing too clearly. We're witnessing the extinction of moral posture in real time. I want to remind you that standing tall was once an act of instinct. Now, in its scarcity, it is an act of rebellion. The human spine evolved to bear weight to hold us steady, but somewhere between perfecting cognitive dissonance and cashing paychecks, we outsourced endurance. The spine, it made poets inconvenient but effective, journalists powerful, citizens demanding a say. Perhaps it wasn't fashionable, but it was functional. It held us up when comfort begged us to kneel. So I mourn the collective death of courage and salute the rare individual spine still erect and still intact, the ones that didn't bow down at the sight of injustice or melt under the slow boil of eroded freedoms. The spine should have been to flatter. It had been to reach truth, even if the truth might bite back. So what can fix this misalignment? It rests, like most things worth saving, on a strong core. Abs of steel are optional, but resolve that refuses to buckle should not be. Pilates will not save democracy, yet posture speaks in the language of power. Here are 3 quick ways to strengthen the core that keeps the people upright. 1, look directly at what others dodge, spine straight, chin up, eyes fixed on injustice. Do not blink until the truth stops wriggling for escape. A fast heartbeat is nothing compared to the heart being done. Refusal to look away is a muscle. Train it. Put your arms to work. Grip a placard. Raise a palm that says no, stop, enough. Write to MPs and institutions. Lodge formal complaints when media fails its duty. If your voice falters, your body finishes the sentence. Silence is a choice, so don't choose it. Take up space. Stand where you're told not to. Treat space as a right, not a ration. Fill streets. Sit at tables that were not set for you. Make your presence the problem for those who prefer shadows. Visibility is pressure, applied at exactly the spot power gets too comfortable. A crowd that refuses to move can drag a nation back to its conscience. So we gather here tonight, half-hunched and well-meaning, and I want to remind you what it felt to stand, shoulders back, undeterred, spine resurrected, to risk being called difficult, to risk being called anything at all, but just knowing that it is the right thing to do. So this is the eulogy not for the dead, but for the living who did not forget how to stand with their spine articulate and vertebrae flowing clarity. For those who still hold their shape in a world-gone limp, may your bones ache, may your voice tremble, your shadow stretch long. May your vertebra click loudly enough to remind others they still have one. Because having a spine, literal or moral, is no longer just anatomy. It reminds us of our humanity. In the name of the Mother, the collective Son, and the unbroken Spirit. Amen.
In many ways, Antoinette has fleshed out a conversation of the Crossroads mission, filling out not just by way of an ode human rights, but by way of an ode human spine. And we recognize that. Now I'm going to call on Gabriel Shipton to make a brief response to Antoinette's address to us. For those of you who may not know, and I don't think there'll be too many, Gabriel is an Australian film producer, human rights advocate, and founder of the Information Rights Project. As the brother of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, Gabriel played a pivotal role in the global campaign for his brother's release, building bipartisan coalitions across Australia and the United States, mobilizing grassroots support, and leading innovative fundraising efforts, including in the cryptocurrency space. He's the director, founder, and chair of the newly established Information Rights Project, which grew from the campaign Free Julian. It seeks to protect the rights of individuals to access, distribute, disseminate information. Gabriel, please.
What a comment. Follow on from Antoinette, that was fantastic. I don't know how, I don't know how to respond.
You have to say it with you.
No, I haven't. You covered everything that's at the heart of that as well. It was just the last time I saw Antoinette was we were crossing the Sydney Harbour Bridge with my brother Julian and my two nephews, and she was helping me wrangle these two kids at the front of the march. So thank you for that as well. She's very good with children too. Also, thank you to Joseph for having me here. It's a great honour to be here with you. And I think, Antoinette, you'd make a great ABC chair. Yeah, it's a sort of career-ending job, it's a bit of a death wish, maybe. Not many places to go from there. I wanted to talk just a little bit about three things that Antoinette touched on. One was independent media, and one was courage, and also what we're doing for rights. Now, it was, I think, the corporate media and the legacy media aren't doing themselves any favors these days. And as Antoinette pointed out, there are so many own goals now that the shift to independent media is inevitable. And we saw that directly in the fight to free Julian. Independent media were really the icebreakers when it came to changing the narrative around Julian's case. And the ABC, you spoke about how there are still good people in the ABC, and I agree with that. And I agree that there is this feedback loop that exists between independent media and corporate media. And so we saw that exact thing happen in my brother's case. The ABC went from attacking Julian to supporting all the smears that came from the United States Department of Justice and others to actually championing his cause. They commissioned a documentary about my dad and his fight to free Julian. And so it can be turned around, which I think is hopeful for all of us. You got in this room. But I also wanted just to touch, you did mention AI, and I'm a little bit more skeptical about AI. I call a lot of these big AI, the US AI companies, like Meta, OpenAI, and X are all what I call scientist adjacent. Yes. I think at the moment they're very focused on growing their models, growing their customer bases, getting us to use these tools. But I think once we are fully engaged with them, that's when they'll start to clamp down and they'll start to change the narrative, particularly as the adoption is raised and we can't, they're so opaque as well, we can't really see what's going on in the background. So I'm a lot more skeptical about the motives behind these large AI companies, and there really is no the only competition possible because there's so much resources involved in this, right? Like just to power these models and the power that they need. The only competition is going to be state to state competition. So you're looking at the United States and China are basically the two competitors in the AI world. So those are the choices that we'll face in the future there, I think. So now I wanted just to touch on courage, and you said courage is contagious, and I really believe that and have personal experience with that. And I just want to talk about perhaps just when we went to, as we were fighting for Julian and fighting for his freedom, we did many visits to Julian in Belmarsh Maximum Security Prison, where he spent 5 or more years there. That prison was built for the IRA during the Troubles, and then after that it housed people who were caught up in the terrorist crackdown. So it was called Britain's Guantanamo. So you can imagine the conditions there were very bad for Julian. And going to see Julian, going into the prison, you would feel a weight, a real weight go on you, a real responsibility, and always a dread knowing that you left. When you left, there was nothing that you could do. You left this person behind in there. They were on there by themselves, fighting to stay alive. And it was through these visits, you would go in, you would be in the big prisoners' hall with all the other prisoners and their families doing visiting, and you were allowed to take in a £10 note. And that £10 note you could spend at the little tea stand that they had there. And Julian would love these fruit cups. Have you ever seen these fruit cups? It's basically baby food, right? And so we had to go and spend £10 on coffee and fruit cups. And I think he sort of it must have, thinking back now, it must have been some sort of childhood comfort thing, right? Like seeing these fruit cups for Julian during these visits would have reminded him of a place where he was safer once upon a time. But Julian, I think, as part of this defense mechanism, developed this gallows humor in the prison. And on every visit, he would describe the prisoners that he interacted with. One really interesting one was a German guy called the eunuch maker, but it's probably not a story to share with you right now, but you can read about him online. But a cannibal community, an online cannibal community. If anyone did that sort of thing. But Julian one day told us this story that in the cell next door to him there was a bus driver who was in the cell next door to him, and he found out what the bus driver had done to get there, and the bus driver had murdered his own wife. And so it's all through comments with violence about there now, particularly from people they're closest to. And so about a couple of weeks after Julian found out about this one bus driver, he said, oh, and then there was another bus driver who moved into the other cell on the other side of him. And it took him a while to find out what this bus driver did, and it did to get into the prison, that is. And he eventually found out that that bus driver had murdered his wife as well. And so Julian thought it would be fucking funny to get these guys together. They would have so much in common. And so he waited and waited for the opportunity to introduce them to each other. And eventually the day came and he was able to introduce them to each other. And he said one to the other, he said, oh, you're both bus drivers, and just left them to it. But it was these sorts of stories that Julian would tell us when we were inside the prison. I think those were ways that that he developed to get through his ordeal there. But speaking to political prisoners all around the world, people who stood in solidarity with Julian, they always told me that what got them through their prison sentences, what helped them stay alive, was knowing that there were people fighting for them on the outside. And so Julian would tell his stories, but we would always go in there. We would tell him about everyone who was fighting for him, all the actions that were taking place all around the world. Small protests, big protests, world leaders that had spoken out for him. And even even if it was, there were some pretty tough times. I remember back in 2021 after the first Trump administration, we thought the Biden administration was going to come in and let Julian out, and didn't. Those were some very, very dark days, but it was at that time that I realized that it didn't matter really what progress we achieved, and that part of the activism that we were doing was just that Julian knew that there were people out there fighting for him, because that's what kept him going. And so just the simple effort of doing something, whether you're successful or not, would keep Julian going inside. And so that really drove me in my activism during that time, and helped me get through a lot of tough times, knowing that I wasn't doing this, to get Julian out of prison, to really go for that big goal, but just to keep him going on the inside. And so I want to thank you. There's a lot of familiar faces here, people who contributed to that fight. And yeah, thank you so much for keeping Julian alive, because without you, I don't know if he would have survived. With that knowledge, we founded the Information Right Project, which is a registered charity that was set up here in Australia to continue on that mission, to support whistleblowers, to support journalists who are suffering persecution. And it's through that personal lens that we approach these cases, knowing what these people need to keep going, and knowing that often there are no organisations out there to help them, who can help them pay their rent, who can help with media training, all these sorts of things, things that we know that these people need. So we want whistleblowers, journalists to know that there is an organisation out there that has their back, and it's not just when they're in prison, but when they're making this courageous decision to risk everything to bring us this sort of information. So that's what we're doing at the Information Rights Project. But thank you so much for this platform and being able to talk to you today. And if anyone hasn't checked out Ed Media, like, you should really. They do a weekly podcast, follow them. It's fantastic. They're even breaking stories, right? Like, it's not just like a lot of these podcasts, a lot of them are commentary, but Ed Media are actually breaking stories. So I suggest you follow along. I did suggest to Jan Brand that they steal the you've probably heard this before, but I was like, oh, what about I'm loving it? I'm loving it. So yeah, that's one of you. Thanks, August.
Can you bring the mic down, Joe?
Human face of support for the freedom of information. There's more to it than just a concept or even political activism. There's a human side to it, and we recognize very much your contribution. Well, now we're going to open it up for some questions addressed to Antoinette Lattouf. If Gabriel wants to make a comment at some point, he can do so. And the questions, please, they should be as succinct as we can make them, so that we can get more questions and answers through in the limited time we have at our disposal. So what I suggest is we want to hear questions from our participants online, as well as those who are attending here in person. And now, who is following the online chat?
Yeah, we're watching it over here, Jack.
Okay. So what I propose to do in a moment is to invite 2 or 3 questions at a time. And sometimes they may be similar in content or the tenor of the question. Sometimes they may be different, but that leads to perhaps Antoinette to choose between the questions and perhaps merge some of the answers together. Before that, I want to remind you, everyone should have received that survey 2 page survey, and it's crucial for us and our work that you fill it in. So if you don't mind, if you haven't already filled it in, to please do so before you head out of Press Centre towards home or anywhere else you might be going. Okay, so and if you haven't got a copy of that, I'm sure one can be made available to you. So let me ask for some questions from the floor here and in a moment from our online. At the back, yes, phone will come your way, a microphone will come your way.
I'll speak up.
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, my name is Jesse. I'm an Aboriginal man. I was one of the co-authors on the effect in the high. Right now, we're being approved, and doctors you know, potentially coming to our country. But right now, in this state, we have truth telling. One of my criticisms, though, is that there's a hollowness to just truth telling as ceremony, ritual, and theatre. Can you tell me why there's more to the truth and more beyond the truth, and why the truth itself is important, but why we need to be more together?
Okay.
Emily, is the microphone not working? It is working.
I think mine's related to that,
Okay.
in the sense that I listened to your wonderful We Were Journos podcast. I just want to ask in relation to that question about truth. And you talked, when you spoke to Chris Hedges about what it was to be a journalist. And I wondered whether you had any thoughts about what it was or how the commitment to truth can be secured in a way that keeps, for example, a public broadcaster from becoming just a state broadcaster.
Any questions coming from online?
Yep, we do.
Better use the microphone, otherwise the online people won't hear.
So we have two main questions from online.
Okay, I'll just take one because I'm trying to
One.
triage the other
One.
two.
One. Okay, so it's for you. What do you think about the ABC whistleblower unit?
Okay. All right. So thank you, Jesse, for your question. For those online who didn't hear the question, it was talking, oh gosh, it was a long question, but essentially talking about truth telling and treaty and what I think about truth and is truth enough in the process. And sorry, the gentleman at the front, I didn't catch your name.
Justin.
Justin at the front asked about what can we do to our public broadcasters' relationship with the truth. Does it make it morph into just a state broadcaster? What is it about this notion of truth? Jesse, I'm not going to purport to speak on, on behalf of First Nations people or issues. From my perspective, truth alone has a form of power, but it's the action that comes after that truth. We have so much hard truths about First Nations people. We have so much documentation about how we failed First Nations people, how we continue to, what the sovereignty that First Nations people need, the community-led solutions. What we are not good at doing is swallowing those hard truths and doing something with them and allowing anything more than tokenistic sort of gestures of acknowledgement and something on Harmony Day and something in NAIDOC Week. So it's what you do with those truths, because we've had the Royal Commission into Indigenous Deaths in Custody, and things have gotten worse. And First Nations children are taken from their families at rates higher than the stolen generation. So it's not the absence of truth, sadly. It's the inaction following it that I think is paralysing this nation. Yes, in terms of truth at the ABC, and this is what I talked about both sidesism. It's like, well, to go to the truth, and I did speak to Chris Hedges, and when I spoke to Omar Al-Akkad, who is an excellent author and a Canadian Egyptian journalist who's written a book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. Highly recommend you read it if you haven't already. One of the things he said about this notion of
balance, this false balance, played out on CNN, where the moderator of the debate was talking to somebody about Trump wanting to erect a wall, or they'll demolish a whole bunch of houses of undocumented migrants along the border. And they were like, well, we need to knock down 300,000 homes. And then the policy person what the evidence that they have, which is rooted in facts and logic and evidence, was like, well, no, like we can't knock them down because it will do X, Y, and Z to social cohesion, to crime, to education, to all sorts of things. And then the moderator, the journalist moderator, said something to the effect of, well, can't we meet halfway? And so the answer is demolish 150,000. It's that kind of ludicrous centrism that has gotten us to the point, to this point. And it's what the ABC does time and time again. It was like, and it did so long for climate change, more so the Murdoch press, to be fair, where it was like, we need to give equal weight to somebody who says that climate change is the tooth fairy, and it's like, well, no, we need to follow the weight of evidence, even if that makes powerful people uncomfortable. So what we continue to see is, 94 people have been killed in Lebanon, as there were a few weeks ago. IDF denies it was them, or whatever it was. It's like, it's ridiculous at this point. It's ridiculous at this point. And on the other thing we need the public broadcaster to stop doing is waiting for cues or permission from the government to do things. So when the week that Anthony Albanese all of a sudden started to use his eyeballs and be moved by pictures of emaciated children in Palestine, that very week gave thumbs up to the rest of the press, and the ABC started really going hard on starvation. This is terrible. And the children have been starved daily for almost 2 years. Why are we waiting for cues from power? That is the role of the state broadcast, not a public broadcast.
The second question.
The second question was for Gabriel. What kept you going when things looked dark for Julian?
I think it was really all the people out there who were coming to our side and helping us do what we were doing. That really kept us going, gave us, I guess, not hope, but more faith that we would eventually be successful. It was engaging with people, being able to talk to people in a room like this, convince them to come to our side, and them actually coming to our side and then assisting us, that kept us going and gave us faith that we would eventually win.
A question from the floor here. Yes.
This is a question from Gabriel.
Speak up.
This is a question from Gabriel and Antoinette. I write articles for personal irritations on Syria, and I reference WikiLeaks, and I've got the WikiLeaks book, and I've read the chapter on Syria, but it's so difficult for people to understand. The ABC still supports the revolution, this so-called revolution in Syria. Do you have an explanation for this?
I was going to ask, we have to start campaigns, for instance, for people like David McBride, who is in prison now, I think, for quite a while. He's faced 5 years. And the media, on the whole, has been quite silent.
Anyone want to combine with these two?
I'll go first for Syria. I mean, I think the ABC is just following the State Department, right? Like they're just following that. Doing their own work on that and just following along. Is my read of it.
Yeah, look, I can't, I probably haven't looked at it as closely as you have. I know that when, the revolution, first happened, I remember making a few social posts about, hold a second, do we know, like, how marginalized groups are going to fare, the origins of these new leaders, just how many people are at risk, also how difficult it is to get reliable information out of Syria. I think there was a little bit of coverage of, oh, there are some Syrian families here upset about their aunties and uncles and whatever, and that was it. Sadly, also like when we see with Sudan, unless there's geopolitical interest or economic interests, we don't spend a lot of time worrying about sectarian divisions and atrocities committed against people. It's not fair, it's not right. And so I wonder if, they've parked in that it's not going to get clicked enough. But that shouldn't discourage a public broadcaster whose remit isn't necessarily popularity in clicks. It should be, a public interest. I'm not sure if that answers it.
There was a pretty telling moment this week where Trump met with the new Syrian president.
Self-appointed Syrian.
And so he met with the Syrian president, and there was images of him meeting him and the actual wanted sign from the State Department, $10 million reward. So I think it's that says it all, really. Like what's going on there.
And you're right about David McBride and whistleblowers. What I saw, and obviously I have a very different experience to David McBride. I have a very different experience to Julian Assange, but the media is very good at sort of closing ranks and protecting one another. It felt incredibly isolating doing what I did by myself, and now I have so many presenters and high-profile people coming out of the woodwork. We always convenient from your couch. And so, it's such a precarious industry with so many redundancies and things. And this is not a justification whatsoever, but this self-interest and this sort of worrying about your own neck, unfortunately, too often drives people far more than the reason we got into this, which was to give a voice to the voiceless, speak truth to power, and do all of the things. These seem like empty slogans lately.
Anyone else? There's a question or a comment? Yes. There, please. Speak up as much as you can.
Sure. I'm a medical student, and much in the way that journalists have been targeted in science and doctors, and as medical students in my medical schools in Australia, we are very much silenced when it's told political neutrality, when sort of we try to just about the doctors and the healthcare system, everything is. We're very, very silenced. There's a lot of times, a lot of interest. I often feel as if I'm sort of having to get between exercising my conscience and
Gone again.
yeah, exercising my conscience and doing my job as a young doctor.
Right.
So, yeah, if you have any advice, sort of.
This is a really difficult one, and shout out to Pearls and Irritations, because this is something that you've been covering. Yes, absolutely, been covering, and it's interesting because a lot of the broader press has failed to adequately cover just how many institutions have been impacted by lobbyists who would rather intimidate people on behalf of a foreign government committing a genocide than allowing medical professionals to look after Australians. It's an abomination. And it continues. This is such a personal question, and I cannot answer it for you. But to say, I know this sounds so cliche, but bad things allowed to flourish when good people do nothing, and you have a level of power of more than you'd imagine that you do. So often my lawyers would say to me, they warned me, this is how it would play out. They'll probably bleed you dry. You'll probably never work again. You're probably this, you're probably that. And I was given all the worst case scenarios to prepare myself. But then I, instead of looking at that, I looked to all the people who looked at that shopping list of no's and went, fuck it. Because they're the ones that history remembers. And they're the ones, and I was like, yes, I actually was also prepared to take a hit. I had a look at my situation. I was like, I'm going to take a hit. All right, what am I going to do? And so I kind of forecast just how much of it that I could take. I didn't go in it blindly, but I just decided that it was, you know, particularly for doctors, you know, what's your oath to, you know, yeah. I don't know, I just think if more people use their positions, and again, like you're a medical student asking this question, which is, you know, incredible and impressive, but I've no doubt that there are senior professors and whatnot who sit on multiple boards. And what I've said in my thing, what I'm seeing more and more is those with the most power doing the most contortionist kind of spine bending at the moment, which is a shame.
Yeah, I believe.
Well, thank you both for your very moving talks, but I suppose it's more like a question that you, in some sense, have covered. Like I have friends that are underground, and I'm thinking particularly Kenya, they're underground at the moment. And the reason they're underground is because they're scared. They're scared that they would be caught. They'll be scared that they would be intimidated. Now, I've always been haunted when I was there last time that one of them said to me, look, Basil, it's okay for you because in Australia you have a certain liberty and capacity to speak out, while here I don't. Because if I do, something could happen to my family. I could be dragged out in the middle of the night.
Sure, yeah.
So what I was going to say that in a way, it's true that the truth is important, but the truth has got to have numbers. You've got to feel safe. Now, I know why you were held in such great admiration, at least from me, was because at one stage when you started, you were like a sole voice. You were taking up a huge institution like the ABC, and I was absolutely thrilled that you actually won. Within the system we have. So to pursue freedom, or even to be democratic, which is something that we as a group here discussed earlier, and how are we going to go forward with that, is, I don't want to make it simple because it's actually also to do with our comfort.
Yes.
But if I'm comfortable, I think it'd be very difficult for me to make a shift unless I feel my comfort is threatened. I just wonder whether you have a reflection on that.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to some of your friends that don't live in Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah, these friends of mine are not in Australia.
Yes, okay. So
but in Australia, you have almost the same thing happening.
Yes.
In the sense that people are scared they'll lose their job.
Yes. And I guess I made a calculated, I took a calculated risk in that I knew I had a certain amount of privilege and power that, you know, my parents didn't have, as, you know, they came as refugees from Lebanon and were pulled out of school at a very young age. And I looked at myself, I was like, okay, I have this career, I have a partner who has an income, I have a following, I have a voice. I looked at all the things I had and made a calculated risk. But I was able to confront tabloid attacks. And I didn't anticipate, well, I did anticipate death threats, but they were more frightening when they came. And I had actually got a man prosecuted and sentenced for the threats that came my way. I guess I didn't go into it blindly. I knew it was going to be difficult, and I knew I had a certain amount of resources and skills and platforms, media skills to navigate what I needed to do. And I knew I was right. And I knew there was genocide. And I knew the more I kept fighting, the more the media would just have to repeat human rights reporting Israel is using starvation as a tool of war. That line has never been repeated. I've done so much free PR for Human Rights Watch. That line has never been more repeated, making Zionists more uncomfortable. And for the first time, we were able to show the sort of the influence we all kind of knew happened in our institutions. It's just so, it was so much embarrassingly worse than we ever imagined. It was so silly. And so knowing what I knew and having the resources that I had, I took a calculated risk.
Yes, Mark, first of all, thank you very much, Antoinette and Gabriel, for everything you both do standing up to power. You have both done so much that communities across Australia and the world have question is around how can we support independent media? And I think in a world that of algorithms and as media that we talk a lot about boycotts, sanctions. I think the other side of that is where do we spend our money and not clear about how can people in this room and elsewhere support what you do.
Thank you. I think I'm probably going to have to do my last question because I have another event I need to get to. That's a really good question. And obviously, you know, you can become a supporter of Media and become a paid subscriber. And that it has helped us grow and hire more people, break stories. But beyond just the plug for Media, what we are trying to do and what we've recognized other people, whether it's the satire page like the Tutor, other independent outlets, we realize we're a slave to the algorithm. So what you need to do is have a direct relationship with people that you trust or outlets that you trust. And so what we're trying to do is cultivate our subscriber newsletter base so that because we can tell, because we speak about Trump, we speak about Gaza, we speak about a whole bunch of things, that our algorithm and the amount that our content is shown can be penalized. We've seen other people on YouTube doing the same thing going, we can see that we're there because they're talking about gas money and oil and mining and that they're, and so it's having a direct line. And so I believe the future is independent outlets with subscriber bases, you know, Pearls and Irritations are here too to shout out to them too, but so they can land in your inbox and you have direct access to your audience that is not determined by Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. Like that is the real.
As Antoinette explained, she has another commitment, that's as many questions as she can take this evening. But before she leaves us, I'm going to call on the editor of Pearls and Irritations, Katrina Jackson, to deliver a vote of thanks. As most of you will know, Pearls and Irritations, Australian-based independent, we've been talking a lot about that, news and analysis publications, and I'm delighted to say that they have sponsored this evening's event, which adds, I think, to the weight of the whole experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you so much to Antoinette and Gabriel. I think we have two examples here of exactly the sorts of qualities we need to display in our current unbelievably discombobulated circumstances: persistence and courage, and persistence and courage and persistence. Can we have another round of applause, please? Everything the Robin spoke about, but we all know is a really big part of being the person who goes first, the person who makes the personal and professional sacrifices, is that it takes a lot to be a whistleblower, and it takes a lot to stand up to a whistleblower, and it's years and years of really hard sweated labour. So we pay tribute to you, and we thank you enormously for both the public profile you both adopted, possibly not of your own desire, but that has given us all the kind of courage that we all need to deal with the sort of world that we live in. So, also, frankly, who doesn't love a woman who's going to be difficult and lasting? Thank you so much to join the invitation to support the event this evening, also to being on the board of Pearls and Irritations, and being a lifelong troublemaking news and political scientist, but advocate at the same time, and a man who really stands up for getting evidence into every discussion he leads, every discussion he takes part in. It's wonderful to see him. I was at the Crossroads University when Joe was teaching there. I'm the only student who was not taught by him. Now, yes, 40,000 students, Joe. 40,000 students, actually 50,000 young lives he has affected and made an enormous difference to. One of the things we all need to do is move the discussions we're all having through platforms, through fearless platforms like Pearls and Irritation. We're only fearless
because we have absolutely no corporate connections. We are utterly independent, and the gentleman behind me who asked how can you help? One simple one, here's your money. Yeah. That's it. We just can't do it. We absolutely can, as all these organisations do, on a wing, a prayer, and a lack of band. Yeah. So without money, we just can't communicate beyond the confine. This is a fantastic room. Full of, I've got to say, so good to see young people here. So good to see. If we don't have these discussions in an environment that is bigger than our own dinner tables, conference rooms where we have to talk with young people, that doesn't mean talking at them. That means talking with them, and that takes effort, it takes money, it takes social media expertise, it takes the sorts of things you can't just do in a room talking to each other. So those sorts of things are absolutely fundamental in making a change. When I first started off, it was very brief. I know you're functioning, you can tell you so when I first started with Girls and Irritations 9 months ago, we had a real track record with Foreign Palestine. We were publishing people who were not being published anywhere else. Peter Slezak from the University of Sydney, who was being attacked left, right, and centre for the things he was saying, almost trumped off campus by his vice chancellor, you know, to the shame of that chancellor. All sorts of other people, Gideon Levy, Laurie Zadler, really prominent Australians who were not getting that platform anywhere else. But when I first started, there was a young man from Gaza who approached us, and he might have made contact just before me. My previous editor, Aaron Martin, is right there. Great job, Aaron. His name was Rifat Ibrahim. Rifat had started a website in Palestine in the middle of the war. He was running from a tent. When it got to Washington tent, he was writing from the side of the road. He was writing really clear, really articulate, fact-based, first-hand accounts of what was going on in his hometown that happened to be in the middle of the war and genocide. As a instinctive journalist, I thought, wow, he's a really good story. It's not only going to get publishing, he's going to get scooped up any minute. Surely the mainstream are going to scoop him up. He's young, he's good looking, he's writing for almost nothing from the centre of a war zone. What is not to like about him? Gold. No one has touched. And it was, I was being naive. But Rifat has been writing for us for almost a year now. To begin with, he was very factual. He never expressed any emotion. He didn't talk about his family circumstances. About 6 months in, I started encouraging him to tell us what his day-to-day life was, and he started telling us what his day-to-day life was like. And, you know, needless to say, you're writing in a tent, you know, him with their family being killed, it's pretty rough. I stopped myself from emailing him every day to make sure he was still alive. But we've only got a certain amount of bandwidth, and in actually wireless bandwidth, so I'm not going to take it up with my middle-class white girl Australian concern. I'm still letting him write and send material to us. One thing that really resonated with me from what Gabriel said was that in the darkest days, the feeling that people outside are behind you is really important to someone like Julian Nathan. Rifat texted us when he could see the pictures of all you guys across the Harbour Bridge. We're in Canberra, much more demonstration, still vigorous. He texted us, you could tell him. His whole family was saying, people care. People care in a place across the other side of the world. So that sort of thing matters enormously. This week, and this is the last point, like I know you're going to go. I'm so sorry. No worries. That's fine. Let's keep it right. Just one final point. So that young man still writes for us. We support him in all the ways we possibly can. This week he wrote a really lovely piece about how excited that he and all of his family are about the story I've done in USC. So he's sitting there, you know, unfortunately, health still ceasefire, yet maybe, and just getting that sort of sustenance from knowing that people in other places are doing good things. So that kind of courage and persistence has been displayed by 2 people we've been lucky enough to hear from tonight, but writ large by people in circumstances so much worse than we're in. So what can we do? What can we do not to feel powerless? We can absolutely support independent media, which are the only places that you're going to find the stories about what's really going on in the world. The only chance we really have to strengthen, to do something about those terrible stats. Thank you so much for that presentation, young man, about the decline of democracy. This is real, this is now. We have to do stuff, and the voice and the written word is really powerful. So anything you can do, explore those invitations. Got a number of you in here right through the platform, which is absolutely fantastic. But all of these organisations, for conversations, for Gabrielle's organisation, for Pearl, doesn't need to be a lot of money, but if you want, that's a really positive.
I can see some people beginning to leave. Please don't forget to fill in the survey. Is there anyone who has a burning question they would like to put to Gabriel before we close? Proceed. Anyone? Yes? 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 Just one minute.
I was doing this. He's got a cold.
Otherwise, okay.
Otherwise, yeah, living life and traveling and enjoying it around. Yeah, it's doing very well.
Before you all go, let me thank everyone, of course, our speakers, our guests, all of you, and all the organisers that have helped to make this happen. And thank you to President Brenton. And remember one thing. It's not done. So many of our institutions are afloat. I mean, we've talked a lot about the situation in Palestine and the weaknesses of our traditional media, of the political class. But you have to ask, what have the religious institutions been doing in this country?
Yes.
What have the academic institutions, universities and colleges? And what have many of the professional associations been doing? No matter where one looks, the sporting association, what have they been doing? So no matter where you are, there's work to be done. As the both speakers have each in their own ways have explained, it's not only what you believe, as Edward Snowden has reminded us more than once, it's not what you just believe that's important. It's what you're willing to sacrifice in respect of your belief. And you know, the political class is very, very astute. They're not worried about a survey that shows 65% think X or Y. They're not worried. Because they know that the 65% are not going to do very much in support of the president. The moment they feel they do, hence they start trending. But often we have not reached that future. Much to do and conversation with the Crossroads team. Thanks you all and look forward to interacting with you in the months and years ahead.